I feel like, well, people
What do
will
you
keep
think?
coming in, but I feel like
I'll be
should we
introing anyway.
start
Yeah.
an intro?
Yeah, we're introing in. It's
Let me open
fine.
it up.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's also kind of funny when Michelle first presented this to me. She's like, well, should we just do the presentation like on the eclipse? I'm like, yeah. And then as we got closer, I'm like, why did I agree to this? It's always a really draining day. It's always a lot. And because in my chart, this eclipse hits my chart quite a bit. It like squares my moon. It's happening in my 10th house. I was just like, ooh, as we got closer. And now I have zero regrets, happy to be here. But I was like, you know what? This might be the only time I do an eclipse lecture on an eclipse. I was like, maybe give myself some time. And that's for all of you too. Like, we should actually all be planning less on days of eclipses, not more. Thankfully, you guys are sitting in on a lecture and pretty chill for you guys. You know, there's a last time for everything. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so welcome in everybody. Let's get to my little, I just want to show you what we're kind of going to go over slowly so that we can let people trickle in. So what we're going to do is first, I'm going to touch on, hang on, my little machine over here is being funny. There we go. So first, I'm going to touch on, what did the ancients teach us, right? Just a little skinny on how long ago eclipses starting being recorded, where in the world. We're focusing more on Western astrology too. So I'm going to make sure to differentiate that. And then what did the ancients even think of them? Like, what were eclipses known for? And some of you probably know some of that. And then we're going to get into the history of the Leo Aquarius eclipse cycle itself, right? What kind of things happen in that 1.5 year period? Because each eclipse cycle, which means, okay, so in this case, it's like the North Node in Aquarius, the South Node in Leo, they're always exactly opposite of each other. And they spend about 1.5 years or like 18 months and some change. I think it's like 18 months, 10 days, 8 hours, something very specific like that, where they stay in these two signs, right? And we're going to get into how these nodes have to do with eclipses themselves. Then we're going to talk about the meaning behind this eclipse that we actually have today. And then lastly, how does it impact you? Like, who's getting the most impacted by this eclipse? And also kind of in general, how I feel about, like, do eclipses even impact all of us? Like, to what extent? And then the astrology behind this one specifically, and how you can kind of pick apart your own birth chart and see how it might specifically affect your life at this time. And it's kind of funny too, because, I'm going to talk about this too, but I'll just say it for now. It's not like these big eclipse events, these reveals, these wild surprises, these internal realizations. It's not like they just happen on the day of eclipses. I'm guessing a lot of you in the chat, since you follow astrology, probably realize that by now. You know that there's an eclipse window. And a lot of astrologers agree that that kind of starts about 10 days before the first eclipse and up to 10 days after the last eclipse. And it's always, typically, unlike, and probably Michelle probably remembers this, in friggin' 2020, we had, instead of eclipses coming in pairs, we actually had a scenario where it was like an eclipse, and then 2 weeks later, another eclipse, and then 2 weeks later, another eclipse. But it's very rare to have that case. So usually we have them come in pairs, and then there's 6 months in between, and then we get another pair. So we really just have like 4 eclipses a year, typically, right? So anyway, my point was you probably know if you're being impacted by at least this first eclipse by now, because we're well within the window. It's already, August 2nd is kind of when the window opened. And so you could already be experiencing realizations, shocks, surprise, awe, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So let's get into it, since we're at 3:38. So I think most people who are going to be here are here. So let's get into it. All right. So when were eclipses first recorded, and what did the ancients think they meant, and who were the ancients in this case, right? So this little image on the right that you see is a fragment of basically a cuneiform tablet, right? Pretty ancient language, showing major astrological events, not just eclipses, but some general major astrological events like comets, meteor showers, etc. And this was actually excavated. It was in the late 1800s, which, if you just stop and think about how we have not had access to this information in so long. It's very trippy to me. But basically, these cuneiform tablets were discovered on several like different ancient Mesopotamian sites, which is partially like Syria, Iraq, Iran, like it's all around there. And it was almost like 70 pieces found all around, like, you know, broken apart and having to put it together. And a lot of these tablets, even though they aren't all about eclipses, it's a lot about eclipses. And not just like, this is an eclipse, you know, it's the omen, like what they predicted for this eclipse. And then also, they did a good job of recording what actually happened during the eclipse as well. So you have your predictions on there, and you also have the what actually happened once the eclipse hit. And so these are the oldest records of Western astrology, dating back to 1500 BC. That's like roughly how much they're estimating, maybe up to like 2000 BC. That's like 3,500 to 4,000 years ago. Like, it's pretty long time people have been tracking eclipses. So what's interesting about these tablets too is that it's obvious that at this time in history, astrology was not used for birth charts. It was not this very individualistic experience. People were not going to their astrologer on the corner. And also, like, electional astrology didn't exist, where you pick out a good chart for something like, oh, I'm getting married next year. Astrologer, please help me pick a good date. You know what I mean? Like, that did not exist. There was no horary astrology where you could go ask an astrologer a question and then they would cast the chart and give you an answer. Like, none of this existed. What it was all for, or at least there's no proof of it, shall I say, because who friggin' knows, right? But it does not seem like it. And so astrology was really more used at the time to predict events that would affect the rulers and the kingdom. It was very much a more macro type of experience. And what's really interesting that I find funny that we don't really do today, and I'm sure some astrologers do, but it was in these tablets shown that they're really following mostly the moon cycle and weather patterns, and kind of in combination. Like, if it's a full moon, but then a comet is flying behind that full moon, or there's a certain color of the clouds, or the wind is being blown in the eastern direction during the full moon. Like, there were these very specific kind of weather patterns that they would write down. And I'm sure there's certain branches of astrology that still do that, but it was really like much more prevalent at this time. And I don't know many astrologers, Western astrologers today that I know that are modern astrologers who do that. I certainly don't. I am a recluse. I need to get outside more. I always tell myself I need to look at the full moon, not just sit down in my house and write about it. But anyway, it was a very physical experience back in the day, right? So this was a form of divination. And it was about omens, warnings that foretell the future. That's what everyone just try to figure out. And also, side note, fun fact, it actually was not until about 500 BC, right? So about 1,000 years later, maybe 1,500 years later after these tablets, that we don't really see proof that they mathematically divided the sun's path into like 12 sectors and the 12 signs. So understand that when we're looking at these cuneiform tablets, it's not like they were saying, oh, total solar eclipse in Leo. They're just like, this was an eclipse. The clouds were doing this. The wind was blowing this way. It was a very different way, not very different, but you can see it was layered in a very different way at the time, right? All right. And I know Michelle is watching the chat. So let me know if there's anything in there I need to know, although I think it still pops up my end. Okay. So I wanted to just give you guys a visual of a solar eclipse. All right. So, because even when I first started doing astrology, I feel like I still like had my mind boggled for a while at the beginning of all of this. And so I want you to know, solar eclipse is, first of all, a new moon. Solar equals new moon, lunar equals full moon. We'll talk about lunar in a minute, so it'll get sunken into your brain a little bit better. But a solar eclipse is a new moon. But instead of the sun and moon just being on the same side as Earth, which it is on a new moon and it still is on a solar eclipse, meaning they're both in the same sign, right? If they're on the same side of Earth, because think about looking at it from an aerial view, it would look like, oh, like picture looking down at Earth and like this zodiac wheel on top of it. And if you were looking, you'd be like, oh, sun and moon are on the same side. They're in the same sign. So, like I said, solar eclipse is a new moon, but instead of the sun and moon simply just being on the same side of Earth, right? and in the same sign, that means that they're actually now also perfectly aligned this way, latitude. It has to be this kind of perfect math, right? That's how we get the moon in front of the sun. I'm sure that makes sense to you, but it's not always the case when it's a new moon. It has to be this type of an alignment where if you're looking at it from this view, they're aligned, right? So that's what makes it a solar eclipse. And for those of you who do not know, the math again with this is just insane. Like, we would not have solar eclipses if the sun wasn't pretty much exactly 400 times larger than the moon and 400 times further away from Earth than the moon. That is the perfect math that makes it so, oh my gosh, when it's an eclipse, a solar eclipse, the moon can appear to be the same size as the sun, and it can create that ring that you see over here. And just for anybody who didn't know that, take a moment, because I think that is so magical. Like, that's just insane to me. This is where like science and magic and maybe spirituality start overlapping, right? And I just to be honest, I am a hater of math. Like, I have hated math my whole life, not until astrology, where I go, oh my God, like math is like this beautiful language. It's like music. It's just really cool. So what did the ancients actually think about solar eclipses specifically, not just eclipses, right? So when solar and new moon eclipses happened, it was actually considered unfavorable for the king. I love it. I was too a hater of math, yes. Was considered unfavorable for the king. Why? Because the sun was represented by the king. So the king was the sun, right? And it was being blocked. The moon was representative of the gods or fate or deities, a divine force. But regardless, it was like, oh, it's blocking the king, right? So it would make sense that they might think the king would die, or the king would get sick, or the king would just not have as much power at this time. And fun fact too, when they went and were delineating the whole chart of the eclipse, they would look at the other planets in the chart as kind of other deities sometimes, or other players in the king's life. Like Jupiter was his advisors, Venus was representative of his daughters, Mars was this. So they could see a whole story and like that picture of the whole eclipse, like the whole chart, right? Side note. So also, because everything was so physical, right? How I was saying, like the wind, the clouds, and all of this, keep in mind, it's not as if like, oh, every 6 months when a solar eclipse happened, the Mesopotamian astrologers thought the king was going to die. No, it had to be seen by the Mesopotamians. If they couldn't see it, they didn't think it would be impactful. So I just wanted you guys to know, when like every single 6 months, they're freaking out. It was only when they were like, oh, we're going to be able to see this one. Like, we got to do something, right? And I'll get to what they would do in a little bit. So let's move on to lunar eclipses. So for lunar eclipses, which is now, this is a full moon, right? So now, as you can see, the moon is opposite of the sun. That's why when we have a full moon, it'll be like, oh, the moon is in Aquarius and the sun is in Leo. They're always going to be opposite. And that's why visually we see them on opposite sides of Earth, because astrology is all about from our point here on Earth, of course, right? Now, here's the thing. Lunar eclipses were still considered ominous because if you've ever seen a lunar eclipse, it's still a little like wonky. Like, because Earth is blocking the sun from being able to really shed light on the moon, a lot of the times the moon will look a little red or a little orange. It just feels weird. It feels and it looks weird. So it makes sense that they also found lunar eclipses to be a bit concerning oftentimes. But for some reason, sometimes they did find lunar eclipses to be positive for the king and negative for his enemies. And we're not actually completely sure, okay? Because, these are ancient records. I don't know. I don't think everybody's delineated everything from what I've studied, right? Which is a lot. But basically, we're not really totally sure why they were sometimes positive, why sometimes negative. But that is what we know so far. But I will say that when regular full moons happened, if the moon was blocked by the clouds, it was thought as if, this is going to be a bad month for the king. Because remember, I was telling you the sun is the king, the moon is the god or gods. So if the clouds were blocking the full moon and we couldn't see the light on the moon, it was seen as like, oh, the moon, the deity, is like rejecting the blessing of the king, or like what the king's trying to bestow to the gods, what he's trying to sacrifice for them or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So it looked like a rejection. So I found that really, really interesting. So I wanted to share that with you guys too. Okay, now let's get back to a little, okay, we're almost done with a little history here. So Mesopotamian astrologers were meticulous, right, about taking records of what was happening during the eclipses. I kind of touched on this earlier, right? So they leaned really heavily on empirical evidence. This is why a lot of us think, you know what? I think the Mesopotamians actually like witnessed kings actually dying on eclipses for them to make this delineation, not just a guess, not just a like the symbology of the sun and moon. We're pretty sure they actually witnessed some kings dying. But they had even more delineations. And at the end of the day, the main things Mesopotamian astrologers would predict for eclipses would be the rise and fall of kings, including the birth, the death, the transfer of the crown, you know, what rise and fall, and emperors, and then natural disasters, big wars, big battles, plagues, and famine, right? So it doesn't seem like in general, it was a super positive thing to have eclipses go down, right? They were preparing for chaos, disorder, unpredictability. Even though, you know, they had some specific predictions, they would always try to delineate the chart, right? But common preparations would actually be beating of drums in the streets, very specific little rituals like moving certain statues, using certain plants. You know what I'm saying? Like they would do specific things in order to try to almost remediate the energy of the eclipse. They would even go, maybe some of you guys know this, so it's like a tale as old as time with eclipses in astrology world, where if the astrologers were scared that the king was going to die, they would actually have practices where they would like take some common fool off the street and make him pretend to be the king and sit on the throne for a while. And they would sometimes even sacrifice him, hoping that because they hid the king away and got a fake one up and they had him kind of play, that maybe, okay, maybe like the gods would be chill with that. You know, they were trying to save the king that way, which is very interesting to me, trying to satisfy the gods. And what's really interesting too is actually in Eastern astrology land, specifically in China, we found that like, oh my God, they had such similar practices. And this was at a time where these cultures did not have any motherfucking communication with each other. So it's just mind blowing. They had beating the drums in the streets. They had specific rituals they did. I'm not sure about the transferring of the king part, but I know about the beating of the drums and having like moving certain sculptures and moving things towards the sun. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's just absolutely fascinating. And then one other thing about these cuneiform tablets, which is just very entertaining, is that there's actually records of astrologers like venting on these cuneiform tablets, like being pissed off when the king wouldn't listen to them, literally referring to the king as like an idiot. Like this person is so unwise. They're not listening to me. They're gonna die. How dare they? And astrologers are apparently very respected. You know, they were more like really truly guides for the king. Like they had a lot of respect. So I think that's probably why they got away with maybe even talking a little shit. I'm feeling that they probably didn't do that to his face. It's on a cuneiform tablet. So I wonder, but I don't think we're ever going to really know. Maybe one day, right? So last thing here, by 500 BC, and remember I was saying 500 BC is about when we start seeing like the zodiac wheel being in like full existence and proof of it, right? So right around the same time, they were starting to be able to really measure the lunar nodes with like really tight accuracy. So this is when, and if you don't know what the lunar nodes are, we're about to get to that next. But if you can measure where the lunar nodes are, you can predict eclipses with amazing accuracy. And so like, it's clear that they probably had good rough estimates up until this point, but this was when they were really on it and they were able to really know when stuff was going down. So I just think that's good to know, because it wasn't as if they were super fully accurate all the way since, 1500. Kind of took some time. All right, let's do our next guy. Okay, so if you didn't know what the nodes are, this is going to be really helpful for you. So here's the chart of the eclipse we're actually experiencing today. So do you see how we have this little upside down horseshoe at 29 degrees Leo? So that's the south node, right? And as you can see, the north node is exactly opposite in Aquarius, also at 29 degrees. So nodes are not physical, right? They are simply representing this point where the sun and the moon like intersect on the same path. Remember I was saying like if you look visually above in an aerial view and then you look this way kind of latitude wise, they have to be aligned on both ends. The nodes are what's measuring how close the sun and moon are to being at the same place and from both directions, right? So it's like a visual representation on the astrological chart that shows how close the sun and moon are to being on the same path in both longitude and latitude. So for an eclipse to take place, it has to be a full moon or a new moon, first of all, happening within 19 degrees maximum of the nodes, right? That makes it potentially an eclipse for the record, not always, but that's kind of where we start. And then if the new moon or full moon is within 12 degrees of the nodes, then we're like, okay, this is definitely an eclipse. And the closer you get to the nodes, the more it's going to be closer to a total eclipse, even like the one we have now. So we're within 9 degrees here, right? We've got the sun and the moon forming the new moon at 20 Leo. We've got the south node at 29 degrees Leo. So we're within 9 degrees and we still have a total. So clearly it doesn't always have to be like, 2 degrees apart or something that intense. We're still getting it on this level with just 9 degrees. So since you guys are into astrology, I bet some of you guys know that this Leo Aquarius eclipse cycle is new, but the nodes just shifted into Leo and Aquarius. Maybe some of you know that they just shifted on July 26th, like not very long ago. And that's why, by the way, hello, these nodes are at 29. And you know what? Let me point this out. Nodes move backwards because isn't it weird that the nodes aren't at 0? You know what I mean? Like when a planet moves into a new sign, it's usually like, hello, like if Venus is going from Aries to Taurus, its last degree in Taurus is going to be 29 degrees. And then as it moves into Aries, it's going to be at 0 Aries, right? Oh, wait, why am I saying Taurus to Aries? I'm so sorry. I started backwardsing the backwardsing. Sorry. Let's say Venus is going from Taurus to the next sign of Gemini, okay? So it'd be at the last degree, it'd be 29 Taurus. And then the next degree should be 0 Gemini. That's going into the diacal order. Planets move in that way. I just want to point out the nodes move backwards. That's why when the nodes first move into 2 new signs, they start at the 29th degree. So just in case you didn't know that or you didn't notice that, that's pretty big to know. It's important. And it'll help you also if you're like, oh my God, I have my moon at 3 degrees of Leo. And you're thinking the nodes just switched into Leo and Aquarius. And you're like, oh my God, the nodes must be so close to my moon. No. You're actually at the end of the cycle. So I definitely wanted to point that out for you guys. So the nodes just switched July 26th. But again, because you guys are into astrology, you may have noticed we had an Aquarius eclipse already though, right? Like we already had back on February 17th of this year, an eclipse in Aquarius. So how is this Leo Aquarius cycle only starting now if we already had one? So let's hang on here. Let's go to over here real quick. Okay. Here's the visual of our February 17th, 2026 eclipse that was in Aquarius, the one I'm just talking about. Well, remember what we just learned? How the nodes just have to be within like 19 degrees maximum to be an eclipse? Well, look at this. We had our new moon in Aquarius, the sun and the moon, and it was considered an eclipse because it was still, look at that, still within 10 degrees of the nodes, right? The sun and moon was still within 10 degrees of the north node. Even though the north node's in Pisces, this was still considered an eclipse in Aquarius because that's where the sun and moon are aligning. We're not going to say when the sun and moon get together in Aquarius, but the north node's in Pisces, that it's an eclipse in Pisces. No, still all about the sun and the moon always. It's just its proximity to the nodes that make it an eclipse or not. So we would also say that this eclipse was almost like a foreshadowing. When we get an eclipse in the sign of Aquarius, but the nodes haven't switched yet, don't you see how it can be kind of like, ooh, it makes sense that that's almost like a preview. We're getting like maybe a taste because we're close enough to the nodes, but hasn't switched. So you can even, maybe not now, but later, like mental note, think about what was happening in your life around February and really think think most of February, like first half of February, because there are some themes that may have happened then that are really unfolding as this eclipse cycle now is kicking off, right? Because now the nodes have actually switched. Now we have eclipses in these two signs, and the ball is really rolling. So there may have just been some things that happened in February that are going to unfold more fully now, right? Now, let's go through the themes and the timeline of this eclipse cycle, and then we're going to touch on a little history about the Leo Aquarius eclipse cycles over maybe like the last 50 years. So you can kind of see what keeps coming up. It's less personal, more like mundane world astrology for the record that we're going to be talking about. Hang tight with me. My little notes are being finicky. Okay. So here's February, the chart we were just looking at, right? Hang on, my little guy's being weird. There we go. So here is that eclipse. This was the foreshadowing I was just talking about. Then we have our eclipse right now. Next, in February of 2027, we'll get our next Aquarius. August 2027, our another solar Leo eclipse. We have our lunar eclipse in Aquarius again, August 2027, so on and so forth. But I did not list every single eclipse that happened between now and when the nodes switch to their next two signs. Remember I said they move backwards, right? So they're going to move into Cancer and Capricorn. I didn't list every single one. What we actually have sprinkled in between here are eclipses in Pisces, Virgo. We even have one in Capricorn, and we have one in Cancer. Because remember what I just showed you about like, oh, we had an Aquarius eclipse, but it was so close to the North Node that like it counted as an eclipse. That's what's happening with the other signs too. So it's the new moon or full moon will be happening in Pisces or Virgo, even though the nodes are like next door in Aquarius and Leo. And we're really ending like the Virgo Pisces eclipse cycle. We're really going to get like we have our Pisces eclipse, right, in like 2 weeks. But I think we even have another Pisces or Virgo one again in 6 months. This is a really long, almost like overlap or like trailing off of the last eclipse cycle. But I don't want to confuse you too much. I want you to still be in that mental space of like, we are in the Leo Aquarius eclipse cycle because that is where the nodes are. But, around those days of the Pisces, Virgo, Capricorn, or Cancer eclipses, you're definitely kind of having these like faint attachments to these other cycles. And this is where astrology is just kind of a little confusing, but a little magical, and showing that it's not like an on and off switch with anything in astrology. Everything's also always overlapping, foreshadowing, further unfolding. And I feel like the longer we live, the more that kind of makes sense. Like things don't ever just end, So I just wanted to point that out. So you're not like, oh my God, why aren't there only Leo and Aquarius eclipses through March of 2028? It's like, yeah, because we're kind of wrapping up a Pisces Virgo, and we're towards the end of this eclipse cycle, closer to March 2028. We're also going to be getting little foreshadowings of the next one. Okay. Now, let's see. Let's get on to the history. Now, I'm not going to lecture you with a bunch of history. I think it's really just fascinating to kind of just like skim these events. So, and before you start a skimming, the years in yellow are when the North Node is in Aquarius and the South Node is in Leo, just like it is now. So it's like the same Leo Aquarius cycle where the nodes are in the same zones. The white ones are going to be the flip, where the North Node is in Leo and the South Node is in Aquarius, if you want to have fun differentiating these events a little bit. So 1952, 1953, I mean, oh my goodness. Wait, before we even get into it, I just want to say, before we skip this, when I was skimming this list, I was like, wow, shit just went down. Like the architecture of the world seemed to be changing. That's like the best way I can put it. It seems like the architecture of the world was changing. And it already makes sense because Leo has so much to do with leaders, right? Like the president, the rulers, the emperors, prime ministers, whoever's in charge. And then Aquarius has so much to do with the collective. So it already makes sense to me, and maybe to you too, that these could be the most defining eclipse cycles, because it's kind of two most important things, right? Who's in charge of the world and how it's going to change is the collective, and who's in charge, right? So they're skimming this, first of all, like Stalin dying, that was the beginning of the end of the USSR. And it was the beginning of the end of communism, instigating so much violence and so much punishment. Like when he died, so many prisoners were released, like thousands and thousands and thousands. And then who took over after him was still communists, totally. But they weren't nearly as punishing. So this was really changing the flavor of communism in Russia in a lot of ways. And because they were kind of the leader of it, that rippled out, right? Not to say everybody else wasn't violent. We're going to get to more things on that in a little bit. African decolonization ended hundreds of years of British and French rule. You know, Britain and France were like, okay, you can have your independence. I'm sure it wasn't that simple with every single country. I just want to point out the Portuguese were not the same. Do you guys ever just think about how weird it is that Portugal is like this like cheaper vacay spot? And then like, yeah, they like took over the whole world and were the ones to fight tooth and nail the most and most recently in giving up their countries. I just think it just cracks me up when I really think about it. So just saying. Yeah, Iranian Revolution. Hello. I think a lot of us have learned a lot about that in the last year. Not saying everybody had to do their history, but I think we all know a lot more about Iranian history because of this year. But the Iranian Revolution destabilized the Middle East drastically. It unleashed a wave of conflict, warfare, proxy battles. You know, it is a rippling effect that still affects the world today for sure. It even proved, you know, in so many ways that, you know, a popular uprising could overthrow a Western-backed regime. Because at the time, you know, the regime, the Shah, was backed by the US and by Britain. And, you know, we felt, oh, we're so powerful. Had no idea that an uprising could really still take out the West. So that was a big, like, consciousness shift, I feel like. I don't know how to say this correctly. Tiananmen Square. I always say this wrong, so sorry I butchered that. But the Square Massacre in Beijing, right? Shattered Western optimism. It was a big deal. At the time, a lot of Americans thought, and the politicians were pushing forward that, oh yeah, like economic freedom is definitely just going to naturally lead to political freedom, in China. And it's like, no. There was some more leniency about economic freedom at this time in China, but they were like, oh yeah, sure, but we're still locking down on the people. And so it kind of, again, like broke this delusion that one was connected to the other, right? And then we also have the Berlin Wall falling, pretty big deal. And again, those of you who are into astrology are probably thinking, wait, but doesn't the, Neptune-Saturn alignment that happens every, 36 years have to do with the Berlin Wall? Yes. And so many of these events that we are reading on in this chart, it's not just the eclipse cycle, right? It's never just one thing with astrology, my friends. Ever, ever, ever. Just like when an astrologer is doing a predictive reading for you, if they see like one difficult transit in your chart, they're not going to be like, oh, well, this is going to be trash. No. It's when we see, oh, this looks difficult. Oh, that looks difficult. Oh, that looks very difficult. We start going, okay, a theme is really happening. So I just want to point out that, yes, these Leo Aquarius eclipse cycles seem very defining, but they are layered with other astrological transits at the same time that really help define what type of events are happening, right? So anyway, so the Berlin Wall falling was viewed globally as a definitive victory of free market capitalism and liberal democracy over communism. And that was a big deal, right? Again, do we think that, I'm just saying that's how people felt at the time, okay? Western financial institutions, trade agreements, corporations expanded rapidly into previously closed communist markets. And this collapse literally created 15 new independent countries, right? Changing borders, currencies, governments overnight. Even, where was it? Even the euro wasn't launched, by the way, till like somewhere between 1998 and 2001. So like there's something about not just money, but really like what defines a country. And money does have a lot to do with that, right? And then we also have, not fun things, global financial crisis, Brexit, plenty of other not fun things. But then we have, oh my gosh, like the DNA structure being discovered in the 50s. That's a pretty big deal. The first human space race, pretty big deal. And the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web one really caught my eye. like, because where are we here? Okay, so yeah, 1989 to 1991 is when World Wide Web like emerges and is created. But then it's not again till the next cycle that it becomes, oh, .com is happening. And now World Wide Web is like super accessible. People know about it. Now everybody's using it. And of course, I'm thinking now, like, if we're in this same cycle now, of course, AI is coming to mind. So I'm like, oh, I'm feeling AI is going to be linked, right, to the cycle that we're in now. And I'm wondering what's going to happen in roughly 9 years when the nodes are yet again in Leo and Aquarius, but they're going to be flipped, right? I don't think I mentioned this yet, so let me mention it now. Yeah, it takes roughly 18 years for the nodes to come back, right? So if the South node is in Leo right now, it's not going to be back in Leo for 18 years, right? But what's half of 18? 9. And so the nodes are going to flip. And I find, again, with this beautiful magical math, it's like, oh, the nodes are in the same signs for 18 months. It takes 18 years for them to come back. It's just, you always see these patterns with astrologers. It's friggin' magical. And again, with every year, I hate math less and less. All right. Let me see if I want to touch on anything else here. So let's get to, what happened during actual eclipses. And I should actually say eclipse windows, like I mentioned previously, because we've all accepted now. Crazy stuff doesn't just happen on the 2 eclipses. It happens up to 10 days before the first one and all the way up to 10 days after the second one of the pair, right? So let's look. And if you want to take a screenshot of this chart, I'm going to leave it up for just like one more second as I get these little notes over here. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So do we see any of the ancient themes we presented earlier present during actual eclipses? Well, within the window, okay? Do we see them? Well, also, side note, we just had an earthquake in Colombia. So yes, already. Of course, not all earthquakes happen under eclipses. It just increases the chances of natural disasters. There's a lot of Uranus and a lot of earthquakes, for the record. All right, let's get to it. Okay, so yes. And instead of looking at all the themes that the ancients listed, let's just focus on, rulers falling and rising / dying, and natural disasters. So, okay, we've got, hang on. Okay, we've got a president over here removed by a military coup. Oh, also there was the Iranian military coup was also in 1953. So there's another one, just saying, another military coup. There's a bunch of them. So this is just a few examples. I can't help but list the other ones that pop into my head. So, okay, we've got a president removed by a military coup. Okay, that's part of the theme for sure. Really huge catastrophic brush fires in Australia. This was like record heat in Australia as well. And it's a little surprising I'm reading these like natural disasters because I'm like 173 people doesn't seem like a ton of people to me. But then when I look more into it, it's like, oh, but it had so many implications, like agriculture wise. It was the hottest summer. Like, I think they're very lucky. Only 173 people died, shall I say. But it was one of the country's worst natural disasters, right? 1990. This was when, I can't remember if he's considered prime minister or president, but basically the leader of South Africa, this is when he started transferring political space away from the apartheid establishment. And they started being like, okay, maybe we're not going to be a bunch of racist assholes and we're going to, let Nelson Mandela out, and everything changed at that point, right? So total shift in power, massive shift in power, hugely defiant. We all know about this, right? Okay, in Nepal, a king died immediately after an eclipse. This is one of many examples, again, many deaths, especially the British royal family, by the way, a lot of the time. It can be also coronations and births in the British royal family. But if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole of like who's really linked to eclipses, Google British royal family and eclipses. You will be mind blown at how many coronations and births and deaths. It's friggin' nuts all the way up until now, like including now. Just saying. Then we have, 1971, we've got the Arab Federation. Oh yeah, this is when Syria, Egypt, Libya, all these presidents were like, we're going to be a 3-member presidency. It's a pretty big deal, I would say. Pretty big shift in power, something quite unprecedented, I would guess as well. And then just another natural disaster example, San Fernando earthquake. This was a really, really major earthquake for California. All right, so there are just some examples for you all. Okay, let's get to the meaning of our eclipse that's happening now, my friends. Also, no, we're going to do questions at the end. Yeah, okay, we'll do questions at the end. Let's talk about this solar eclipse in Leo. So, in the most important way, this is really about kind of letting go of that Leo side of ourselves, if you want to simplify it, because the South Node is about shedding, letting go, releasing, not just like, with Leo, it's like releasing our ego. And because Leo is a very passionate, fixed sign, fixed meaning it's stubborn and can attach to things, right? Now, both signs are fixed, by the way. Leo is fixed, so is Aquarius. But Leo is still that lion, like it gets its nails into you. It really sinks in. I think we all know Aquarius is a bit more detached, right? There's definitely, because it's an air sign. So the South Node itself is letting go, releasing, and shedding. With Leo, it's like more ego-driven goals, maybe the control you want to have, the possessiveness that you have over something, maybe even specifically shedding the urge of validation or needing to be seen or needing attention, needing recognition, needing everybody to go, oh, you were just shining so much, you're so great. That kind of stuff, right? And I'm making fun of no one. I have a lot of Leo in my chart. Okay. So that can be very easily a part of this eclipse cycle and a part of this eclipse specifically today for you guys. And again, you could be feeling that up to 10 days ago and 10 days afterwards, right? Now, the release of even maybe specifically creative outlets you've outgrown. Things that are, Leo is the heart. And it is related to creativity because it's solar. It's about self-expression. So self-expression and creativity kind of go hand in hand. So this may be just kind of even naturally, it doesn't have to be so dramatic. This can be kind of naturally when you're like, oh, kind of grown that creative project thing I used to do all the time. Maybe you don't want to do watercolors anymore. Maybe you're an actor and you've been doing a certain type of plays. Like I've been in drama for so long and you're like, ugh, I want to do comedy. Like I want to switch it up. And it could be as simple as even maybe it's your music taste is switching. I really feel like, especially if you're somebody who really gets into it, like you sing along, you dance to your music, because this is about the self more. It's not like, this isn't the Pisces eclipse about the music that you're receiving from the collective. This is more about you and your involvement. So this can, again, be this natural time. You just kind of shed these parts of yourself. You're just outgrowing things. It doesn't have to be so detrimental or dramatic, right? But speaking of drama, I would love if some people also maybe let go of their love of drama. I think some people might also realize maybe I can just chill out a little bit more. Maybe I don't need to be so affected. I don't need to be so expressive about what I think about what's going on and with everybody else. I'm trying to let go of a little bit of reality TV. Okay, for the record, I think that's going to be a part of my shedding. Not very deep. That's my least deep shedding that I'm going to be doing. But as the North Node is in Aquarius, what's the flip of this? It's okay, the North Node is trying to pull us towards something. And modern astrologers, and I'm going to be honest with you guys, I don't even know if I fully agree with this interpretation, but I like sharing it, and I still partially believe in it, is what I should say. Okay. But not everybody has to agree on this, is what I'm trying to point out, because there's many different ideas around astrology. But the North Node, the idea is it's in modern astrology, it's pulling us towards a higher path, towards growth, towards where it might be uncomfortable, but we're going to improve ourselves. And maybe we're getting on a better, higher path if we lean towards the North Node, right? So the North Node Aquarius says, consider those around you, right? Consider the collective, consider your friends, consider your audience, consider your clients, consider how your solar energy, Leo, how your shine and your talent and your confidence and your warmth can actually warm up others. And because Aquarius is also about, again, the collective, it tends to be associated with larger, movements larger than yourself. We can go very kumbaya and say humanitarian movements. But can I just tell you guys, there are plenty of people who think they're humanitarian, but they're not the nicest of folks, and they're Aquarius. They have very fixed ideals. That's kind of a big part of Aquarius too. Like, I don't know if you guys have noticed, and I'm not saying everybody with heavy Aquarius in their chart is political, but there's a lot of people with heavy Aquarius who are political because they're fixed on their ideals and they feel like they need to impact the world. I do not agree with my father's politics, but when he's spewing his political opinions that I think are damaging, he thinks he's helping the world. He thinks that this is positive. But my point is not to like rag on the Aquarius sign, because I love Aquarius. I have plenty of friends who are. I just don't want to like over water down Aquarius, because I always hear like, oh, Aquarius is just like, oh, they're so whimsical. They just want to help everybody. And I'm like, that is such a not accurate, yo. Like, it's just not accurate. It's like, no. You have a fixed idea and you want to make an impact. That's for sure. But for all of us sitting here, let's try to make a positive impact. And the point of this eclipse cycle is to use your generosity, your light, your confidence, your warmth, your talents to impact those around you in a positive way. And I do totally agree that that is such a big reason that this eclipse cycle is here right now. It's much less about you shining to just shine for yourself, right? But I also lastly want to say, I don't think that with the South Node in Leo, it's about stopping being creative, like not shining, not showing your talents. It's just about using them in a way that's not about your own validation, your own attention, and your own personal fulfillment. It's much bigger and more beautiful than that. So I really love the South Node in Leo and the North Node in Aquarius, even though I got a bunch of stuff in Leo and I'm a little not scared, but I'm like, okay, big shedding. Lots of shedding for me, lots of letting go. And let's be honest, we're human beings. You know, that means change. That means maybe letting go of things that we might not necessarily feel that we're ready to let go of. Sometimes this comes with you're naturally outgrowing stuff, but it also can reflect, you know, this eclipse today can reflect also maybe having to let go of things you might not feel so ready to let go of, right? It can be both. Now, this last aspect, okay, notice this. The sun and moon in Leo are not making any really hard, tight aspects to anything else, not to Venus, not to Uranus, not to Mars, Chiron, Saturn, nothing, right? But what I do notice is that Mercury over here is opposing Pluto pretty tightly. They've got a 2 degrees of separation, 5-3, and they're forming a square to Chiron over here at 0. Although it's not like tight. I think a lot of us are feeling this, especially from me talking to friends and clients. I think this is a prevalent theme right now. This is like a tight opposition between Mercury and Pluto, both squaring Chiron. So this is a T-square. It's like a very pressurized aspect where all 3 planets almost feel like they're at odds with each other. And what this tension does, and specifically with these planets' involvement, is I read this as, we are all due for a mental transformation. And we might have to face Chiron. Old wounds, weird insecurities, things that make us feel awkward and uncomfortable. Really, it's very much an asteroid of insecurity. And because we've got Pluto involved, this planet of like compulsion and obsession and the deep, dark shadows of our psyche, deep desires we might not even want to admit to ourselves typically. You know, also eclipses are typically about reveals. Like reveals can happen during eclipses, like secrets coming out. I think this really heightened that theme. When Mercury's opposite Pluto, we tend to see information coming out that we didn't know. For example, on a mundane level right now, there's that weird story with like, Trump secretly like wasn't on the Turkish plane or whatever. Like that happened, that came out yesterday. That is a kind of a perfect example, like us finding out even like covert operations and ways in which people were trying to be sneaky. Yes, people can confess something during this time, to answer your question. That's exactly what I'm saying. Almost equally so, somebody who really doesn't want to let a secret out will probably try to double down as much as they can. Because when Mercury, this planet of like, let's say for right now, just communication, like what we're sharing with our words, is opposite Pluto, it's almost like predictively, it predicts like, oh, the secrets in the darkness will come out through the communication. but how it's actually experienced on an individual level can feel more like, oh my God, I have this big secret. And it's just your awareness of the secret is so high. So depending on the individual, are they going to, have a weak moment or have an honest moment? It depends on, in my opinion, how good the person is. You know what I mean? Or what the secret is about. Like, is that pressure going to make them just finally go, okay, I'm going to say it? Or is that pressure going to make them just stuff it down more? But either way, they're highly aware that they're hiding something. So you can see how it can kind of create different scenarios, but the feeling is the awareness, Yeah. And some of us could be struggling to keep secrets to ourselves, for sure. Now, this can be a painful and tender process, especially when we're thinking about like, maybe this eclipse is asking you to let go of certain things or taking certain things away from you. And it's definitely like an ego moment of like, because we're talking Leo. And then we've got this square to Chiron. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, this is a really like tender eclipse, because for those of us who are like, I do want to take on the challenge of changing and progressing in my evolution as a human and becoming better, you can be feeling this, in my opinion, like even more. And when you're having an ego challenge, plus we've got this Chiron bringing up our insecurities, I think that you can already imagine like putting this all together is quite a lot. You can feel, I wouldn't say necessarily shameful, because I think this is still a new moon. I think there's still this excitement for something new and to wipe the slate clean and to do something different. And that's what's really helpful about a new moon eclipse. But at the same time, I think a lot of us can be recognizing like, oh, this change is deeper than I thought. It's not just letting go of this one habit. It's like realizing why I've been doing this habit and what weird shame or past thing inside of me is linked to that habit. And having to then work through that to really let go of whatever this thing is. You get what I'm saying? So I just think it's going to be really deep and tender with Chiron and Pluto involved. And then Leo being this sign of the ego, which all of our egos are somewhat fragile, right? So yeah, it's big, big ego challenge. Here, let me just see if this question. Okay, yeah, we're going to get to that. I'm going to kind of touch on that in just a little bit. Okay. Talking about the midheaven. Okay, so let's get on to how this is going to affect us personally. Okay. And if you guys read the Laura doc at all, we had a little article come out yesterday where I kind of touched on this. But, the eclipses impact those of us who have fixed signs on the ascendant. And other angles also in fixed signs, particularly between 17 and 23 degrees. So let's say you could be rising Leo, Taurus, Aquarius, Scorpio, right? Now, especially if your ascendant point or your midheaven or your descendant or your IC, those angles are really within that 17 to 23 degrees of any of those four fixed signs. That's where you're really getting the big juice of the major beginnings, major endings, realizations, secrets being revealed, surprising events, And I don't think I emphasize this enough, but I just want you to make sure like eclipses can be both an internal experience and external, or one or the other. I've definitely had eclipses where I felt like it was all internal, right? So much change, but it all came from within me. It all came from like realizations. And then I've had other eclipses where I'm like, oh my God, I'm just getting smacked with like external things happening, what felt like at me. And then I had to react, right? And then the change kind of happens in my reaction. But yeah, so for those four angles, and I'll explain those angles in just one second, but also personal planets, which is the sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. If you have any personal planets between 17 and 23 degrees of any of the four fixed signs, you're also getting hit. So I'll touch on the angles for a second. Let's say this Leo eclipse is on top of your ascendant, or it's squaring your ascendant because you either have Taurus or Scorpio as your ascendant, right? Or it's opposing because it's Aquarius. Here's my deal. The ascendant is all about your identity, your physical body. It is literally like how you carry yourself. It's not just appearance, right? It's how you carry yourself. It's your character. It's how people perceive you. But I like to say, I think it's identity more than anything. So when an eclipse is squaring, opposing, or on top of your ascendant, it is the most deep. It is you changing. The ascendant is the most important angle of the entire chart. The ascendant almost spilled. If something hits the ascendant, the whole life changes because you're changing. So everything around you changes, right? Now, with the descendant, this is partnerships. This is collaborations. These are the one-on-one connections. Of course, the descendant is mainly like a point of marriage, but it can be your partner, it can be your best friend. If you're somebody who has a gig that is where you work with one-on-one clients a lot, it can represent them. And in general, the descendant really just has to do with how you feel about others and how you're relating to others and how others are showing up. So if you have your descendant, and keep in mind, if let's say you're a rising Leo, okay, so then that means that the eclipse is like on or near your ascendant, right? That means it's opposing your descendant. Don't confuse yourself with like, the eclipse is on my ascendant, but it's opposing my descendant. Focus on where it's at. You can think about both if you want, but let's say that your descendant is like Leo, right? Your descendant is getting hit. So this is what's going to change for you. Right? That's partnerships are what are going to change, or how you view partnerships, or how you want to even show up in partnerships, what you think should be expected even in them, right? And then when we get to the midheaven, which is what the question was about, the midheaven is very much typically about career. It's about your public image, your public standing, your ambitions, what you want to do out in the world. And let's say you don't have a career. It's more about like your vocation. Again, what people know you for, what you do out there on the bigger world stage, right? How people think of you. But again, it's ambition. So even if it's not career ambitions and it's more just like, just long-term important goals that you have in life, if the eclipse is on top of your midheaven or squaring your midheaven, then hey, your direction in life in a big way is probably going to change because your ambitions are shifting, or something is happening outside of you that's forcing your ambitions to change. Maybe you had a plan, you had a 5-year plan, and then something popped up and you're like, oh, that can't be my 5-year plan anymore. Things like that, right? Then we get to the IC, and that is the bottom of the chart. The bottom of the chart is about your internal emotional world, but very much your family, how you relate to your family, what's going on in your private life, what's going on in your domestic life, what's going on behind closed doors. If the midheaven is opposite, the MC is all about public image and public life. The IC is all about your internal experience and what's going on behind closed doors at home, okay? And really, when we get to personal planets, just one quick example. If this eclipse is hitting your Venus, of course, it's most likely going to be changing things and impacting things that have to do with relationships, your self-worth, core values. But to be honest, you can get way more specific and accurate when you actually know what houses in your chart each personal planet represents for you. And that's a whole other thing. We don't have time to get into all that detail. But I will probably be doing an Astrology 101 course in the fall if you want to know that stuff. I use the whole sign house system, and that is how that theory is used. So that is how that practice works. It's really cool because it's like, let's say the eclipse is hitting your sun and the sun rules your 4th house of the home. It's like, okay, well, even if the sun is over here in the 7th house of partnership and it's getting hit, it rules your 4th house of home life and family life. So now we know, shifts in both partnership and family, and probably a combination somehow. One has to do with the other. Yes, whole sign is Hellenistic. And it's also in other forms of ancient astrology as well, but Hellenistic for sure. Okay, skimmies. I want you guys, because we're running a little low on time, take a screenshot if you are a rising fixed sign, if you're Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, or Aquarius. As you can see, if you're a rising Taurus, that means Leo is your 4th house. Leo is located in your 4th house. Again, I'm using whole sign, okay? If you want to use Placidus, this can still apply. It kind of depends. Like, I've looked at my chart in whole sign and in Placidus, and some things are the same and some things are a little bit different, but just because it's me lecturing and this is the system I use, This is going to be the whole sign. Okay. So Taurus is the fourth. So as you can see, I'm saying letting go. I'm saying shedding over here. I'm saying letting go, shedding over here, because we're talking about the South Node, right? So old family patterns, living situations, attachments to the past. The fourth is also like memories, childhood, how we feel about our parents. It's your parents, and it's your living situation, right? So maybe something has to be let go of for a new living situation. Okay, I need to not be this detailed for all of these. Leo, the first house. I think you can get that. I mean, if you're rising Leo, you know this one's for you. That's for sure. Very big personal reset for you. And we'll continue to unfold in this cycle. I want to remind you guys that this, whatever is happening around now in this eclipse window, this story is not over. You know, it keeps unfolding throughout this eclipse cycle. It's not final. Scorpio, Leo is the 10th. Just like the midheaven has to do with career, and usually the midheaven falls into the 10th house, but it can fall into the 11th, it can fall into the 9th. Even if you're born at a certain high latitude in the world, it can actually fall all the way to like the 8th and the 12th, which is pretty wild on the more rare side. But anyway, then we've got Aquarius, 7th house of partnership, right? And yes, of course, eclipses have to do with turning points and yada yada. Okay, for the mutables, if you are a rising mutable sign, that's Gemini, Virgo, Sag, Pisces. Take a little shot right there. Let me just check the chat real quick. There ever be an option in Laura to change house systems? Oh, I don't know. That's a Michelle question. I don't know if Michelle knows. Okay. So for the mutables, just wanted to give you time to take a little screenshot. You know, for the Geminis, I kind of love this for the Geminis because Leo is your third house. And the third house seems to have a lot in common with Gemini itself. You know, it's a house of communication and information and contracts and paperwork and learning, picking up new skills. So I feel like a lot of rising Geminis are actually in a really, maybe I shouldn't say enjoy this eclipse cycle, because you all have specific birth charts and you could have Saturn squaring this eclipse and it can rule your first house. There's so many ways in which is why, guys, like whenever you watch these freaking TikTok videos, they're like, what's going to happen? Oh, drives me insane. You all have specific birth charts. There's so many things in your chart that can change the story. But in general, you will look back on this time and be like, oh, this is true. You know, I think it's gonna be good for Geminis is what I should say, because you're releasing old ways of thinking. You're open to even more new things. I wonder if like Geminis are going to be even like curious about stuff they've never been curious about. So I feel like that's just so exciting for Geminis. Also a release of like certain conscious thoughts, which can be just very helpful and therapeutic. Virgo, we've got the 12th house. You know, this is deeper for the rising Virgos and the rising Pisces. This is a deeper eclipse cycle. This is a lot to do with kind of getting new routines and habits and mental health like together during this whole 18 months or year and a half of this cycle. For the Virgos, I think it's more about facing unconscious thought patterns that might be linked to a lot of like past pain and feeling like it's about self-restriction and ways in which you limit yourself. And I love that the South Node is going through the 12th house for you guys, because the South is saying to let go of those things, right? And then for the Pisces, it's more about letting go of like just ways in which you overburden yourself in more of a physical manner or like just labor intensive, where the 12th is like how you're thinking about limiting yourself and wanting to let go of that. This is like wanting to let go of like almost assumed tasks and things you do every day that like is just draining, right? South Node draining. Sagittarius, we've got the 9th. Just like Gemini, I think this is going to be kind of fun. You know, shedding old beliefs, changing your perspective. Okay, wait, hang on, sorry. Cardinals. Let's get to Cardinals. I have my little notes over here. Oh, so cool. That's crazy. Okay, nice. I love that in the chat. And then with rising sign Aries, you know, the 5th house, beautiful, shedding old romance. I mean, because Aries is like So Aries, if it's on the first house, Leo is the fifth. And the fifth house themes are already kind of in common with Leo in general. So they get a real like big experience of letting go of Leo type things. Although the fifth isn't associated with the ego, but it is associated with creative expression. So I could see a lot of rising Aries people finding totally new ways to creatively express themselves and relate to their children and things like this. Cancer, second house. Yep, financial patterns, the relationship with their self-worth. With Libra, we have a shedding of certain friendships, how they want to show up, who they want to network with, what people to make sure they surround themselves with to make their dreams happen. And then with Capricorn, it's the eighth, releasing financial entanglements, certain debts. And also, because the South Node is drain, for a lot of rising Capricorns, you might really notice where your financial entanglements are draining you. You might have to actively untangle, And it's funny because I don't want to say the South Node and the eighth doesn't mean your debts, will drain you. It can be also the release of debts, you finally pay them off. You're that attachment is now gone by the end of the cycle. Could be at the beginning of the cycle. But I'm just saying. Okay. Beautiful, beautiful. And here we go. That is the end of my presentation. We're going to do questions. And I can go back to other slides if people have specific questions. We need to go back. But if you want to book with me, here is my QR code. And if you want to test the Laura app, because we're still working on that right now, there you go, my friends. And then I think Michelle's in charge of this group chat.
That was
Michelle,
so amazing. We're here. Amazing. Yes, okay. Definitely. If you, we just got so much incredible information here. Definitely. Yes, Lauren will definitely do solar returns on bookings for sure.
Yeah, I'm actually re-adding that to my list soon. Thank you for reminding me. I gotta do that tomorrow.
Yeah, she can always pull it up on a natal chart reading.
Oh yeah, but I do want to do solar returns specifically. Go ahead.
Love it. So yes, scan those to book with Lauren, to be a beta tester. We have just 5 minutes left. If there are any questions that Lauren didn't cover, I'm going through this. Will definitely be saved as a recording. Yes, it will be up on our YouTube, the Laura YouTube. If there's any questions, I feel like you hit a lot of them, Lauren, as they were coming up.
No, it's I kind of said a lot of things.
I'm so happy you're loving the app, Isabella. Yeah, Lauren is a history genius. Also, with your glasses on, Lauren, I was you're extra.
I seem so much nerdier.
I know. Yeah, if there are any questions,
yeah, we'll hang for a minute here.
Okay, well, Jennifer wants to know, specifically about the 0 degree fixed ascendants.
Okay. Yeah. What? Want to just tell me your ascendant specifically?
Yeah.
Why did I see that question?
Let me see. Wait. How does from Jennifer? How does this affect those with 0 degree fixed ascendants? I have it in Scorpio. Okay. I also have Aquarius IC.
Okay, I'm guessing you're asking because I was explaining how the nodes kind of move backwards, right? So the nodes just entered Leo and Aquarius, and they're at 29. So one would argue that these eclipses are probably going to intensify for you the more the nodes get close. So in more a year, the nodes are going to be way closer to your ascendant, right? You said Scorpio? Did you say Scorpio?
Yeah, Scorpio rising, yeah.
Yeah, so the nodes are going to get closer and closer to squaring your ascendant. And so the eclipses are kind of most likely going to intensify. But also, maybe you have other personal planets in any of those fixed signs. And if those are getting hit as well, it might not feel so much like that. It might feel like this whole time is a lot, But yeah, does that answer your question? I think that does.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer.
Okay,
amazing. Yay. Okay, well, thank you all so much for coming. And I know this is an absolutely crazy day and will be a crazy 2 weeks, as we all now know, the chaos of eclipse season. And definitely scan this code, book with Lauren, come test the app. I'm so happy everyone's been loving it. But yeah, happy solar eclipse
Happy solar
and
eclipse. And I'm just putting my name
enjoy.
there. But, ooh, 444.